I never imagined my 70th birthday would mark the beginning of the most devastating chapter of my life. My name is Evelyn, and for decades I believed I had seen everything life could throw at me. I was wrong. That spring morning started like any other, ordinary and unremarkable, the kind of day you forget almost as soon as it passes. But some moments have a way of carving themselves into your memory with such precision that you can recall every detail years later. Our family reunion had been lovely. Everyone gathered around my dining table, passing dishes, sharing stories, and for once nobody argued. My granddaughter brought an old photo album, and we spent hours laughing and crying over pictures from summers long past. The warmth in that room felt genuine, safe, like we had finally found our way back to being a real family again. I remember thinking how grateful I was for these moments, how lucky I felt to have everyone together under one roof. After they left, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee growing cold beside me. I decided to check my bank account, just a routine glance at my finances like I did every few days. I opened the banking app on my phone and stared at the screen, certain there had been some kind of technical error. The balance showed zero. Not a small amount, not a few $100s remaining, but zero. A string of zeros where my life savings had been just days before. My hands went numb. I refreshed the app again and again, willing the numbers to correct themselves, but nothing changed. That money represented more than numbers on a screen. It was years of sacrifice, every small comfort I had denied myself, every penny saved so I could maintain my independence in these final years of my life. It was my security, my dignity, my promise to myself that I would never become a burden to anyone. The room began to tilt slightly, that strange sensation when your body understands something terrible before your mind can process it. My chest tightened. I tried to call out, but my voice caught in my throat. My daughter Nina was in the living room helping my granddaughter with a puzzle. She must have noticed my expression because she looked up with concern. She walked over and I held up my phone with shaking hands. She looked at the screen and her jaw tightened in that particular way it does when she is trying to control her impatience, as if I had done something foolish, as if somehow this was my fault. Before either of us could speak, Derek, her husband, made a sound from the couch. It was not quite a laugh, more like a snort of derision. He had a beer in his hand and wore the kind of smirk you see on someone who just won a bet you never knew you were part of. His words came out casual, almost amused, as if he were commenting on the weather rather than destroying my life. He said, "They needed the money more than I did." Those words sliced through me worse than any scream could have. The coffee in my mouth suddenly tasted metallic. Everything else in the room disappeared except for those words hanging in the air, mocking me. They needed it more than I did. For several long moments I could not breathe, could not think, could not do anything except sit there trembling. The betrayal felt intimate and deliberate. It was as if someone had reached inside my chest and squeezed my heart until it stopped beating. Every instinct told me to gather my things and leave, to get out of that house and away from the storm. But something else rose up inside me, something I had buried for too long under years of being accommodating, of being the family safety net, of never saying no when they asked for help. When my voice finally came, it was small but steady. I told them they would not mind what was coming next. Derek actually laughed like I had told a joke. Nina looked away, uncomfortable but refusing to intervene. My granddaughter sensed the tension and started fidgeting with her puzzle pieces. I did not smile. I did not blink. I simply sat there, letting them see that something had fundamentally changed. Then a loud bang shook the house. The timing was so perfect it felt like the universe had been waiting for this exact moment to make an entrance. For a split second I thought perhaps a neighbor had dropped something or a branch had fallen. But then the back door flew open. Late afternoon light spilled across the kitchen floor, bright and unforgiving. I heard footsteps, firm and deliberate. Nina's face went white. Derek's amusement froze into something harder, something that looked almost like fear. My granddaughter started to cry. Standing in my doorway were two city officers, their badges catching the light. They were not there for a social visit. The taller officer had graying hair and the kind of face that had seen too many difficult conversations. The shorter one carried a tablet and a notepad. The taller officer introduced himself as Officer Rodriguez and his partner as Officer Bennett. He explained they had received a report from my bank regarding unauthorized transfers from my account. He asked if they could sit down. I was still clutching my phone, confused about how they could possibly know what had just happened. Officer Bennett pulled out a chair at my kitchen table without waiting for permission and explained that my bank's fraud detection system had flagged multiple large transfers. They were required by law to report suspected elder financial exploitation. Those words landed heavy in the room. Elder financial exploitation. Nina's mouth opened and then closed. Derek set his beer down on the coffee table, his earlier amusement completely gone. He shifted his weight, avoiding everyone's eyes. My granddaughter buried her face in her mother's side, confused by the sudden tension. Officer Rodriguez sat across from me with calm, professional movements. It was the kind of calm that felt kinder than any fury because it was steady and real. He was not there to judge me. He was there to listen. He asked when I first noticed the discrepancy in my account. I told him I had just discovered it after our family reunion, that everything was gone. My savings, my emergency fund, all of it. Officer Bennett tapped notes into his tablet and asked how much money we were talking about. I told him the number. It was not a fortune by some standards, but it was mine. It represented years of careful budgeting, of skipping restaurant meals and clipping coupons, of saying no to myself so I could have security when I truly needed it. Nina started to speak before I could continue. She told the officers I had been confused with technology lately, that I might have clicked on something or given my password to someone by accident. The way she said it made me sound senile and incompetent. Officer Rodriguez looked up slowly from his notepad, his gaze moving from Nina to me, measuring the situation. He told Nina they would need to see identification and relevant documents, and they would need to ask about anyone who had access to my banking information. The question hung in the air like a spotlight. Derek stood up suddenly, too quickly. He muttered something about needing water and headed toward the kitchen sink. His hands were unsteady. Officer Bennett asked him to stay in the room. Derek froze, then turned back, his face tight. I pulled myself together and handed over the information I had saved on my phone. I kept account statements backed up in the cloud, receipts for regular deposits, and a small spreadsheet I had maintained for years to track my pension and expenses. I had always been meticulous about my finances. It was how I had kept my independence this long. Officer Rodriguez commented that I kept very organized records and that it would help their investigation significantly. As he scrolled through the documents on his tablet, his expression shifted from neutral to something more focused. Officer Bennett leaned over to look, and they exchanged a glance that communicated more than words. Rodriguez explained that the transfers were not random. They were methodical, occurring at regular intervals in large amounts. Someone had used my online banking login multiple times over the past 6 weeks. 6 weeks! My stomach dropped. Bennett added that someone had also changed my password and rerouted my account alerts to a different phone number, which was why I had not received any notifications. The room went very quiet. Nina's fingers twisted together anxiously. Officer Bennett interrupted her gently but firmly, explaining that this level of access required personal information, security questions, previous passwords, and possibly even physical access to documents. This was not an outside scammer. Whoever did this knew my routines, my personal details, my schedule. Derek's face had gone pale. He sank back onto the couch, his earlier confidence completely shattered. Officer Rodriguez looked directly at me, and there was something soft in his eyes. Compassion perhaps, or respect. He explained this was elder financial exploitation, something they saw more often than people realized, and unfortunately in most cases it was committed by family members or close friends who had access and opportunity. They would take my full statement and begin an investigation immediately. My granddaughter cried harder. Nina tried to comfort her, but her own hands were shaking. As the officers prepared to leave, they handed me a card with case numbers and contact information. They promised someone from the fraud unit would follow up within 24 hours. They took photos of my documents with my permission. They were thorough, patient, and kind. At the door, Officer Rodriguez turned back and told me I had done nothing wrong. He said keeping good records, noticing quickly, and reporting this took strength. He told me not to let anyone make me feel otherwise. I nodded, not trusting my voice to remain steady. After they left, the house felt different, smaller somehow. The air was thick with unspoken accusations and barely contained panic. Derek made a move to say something, but whatever words he had prepared died in his throat when he saw the look on my face. Nina stood frozen with her arms wrapped around herself. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, one thought kept circling back sharp and clear. This was not a mistake. This was not confusion or carelessness on my part. This was theft, intimate and calculated, timed to moments when I would not notice. Someone close to me, someone I had trusted and fed and helped, had methodically emptied my life savings, and they had done it on purpose. The next morning I woke before dawn. Sleep had been impossible, my mind replaying every conversation, every favor, every moment when I had missed the signs. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open. If the officers needed a statement, if the bank needed proof, then I would give them everything. I had spent years keeping my finances organized precisely so I would never lose track of my independence. Now that discipline would serve a different purpose. I started pulling files from my cloud storage, bank statements going back 3 years, receipts for every transfer I had authorized, the spreadsheet where I tracked every penny of my pension, every grocery trip, every utility bill. I had always been careful, methodical even, because I never wanted to be caught off guard. The irony was not lost on me. I had prepared for emergencies, for medical bills, for home repairs. I had not prepared for my own family to treat me like an open wallet. As I worked, memories surfaced unbidden. Small moments that had not seemed important at the time but now formed a pattern I could not ignore. 2 years ago, Derek had lost his job and they needed help with the mortgage. I paid 3 months of payments without hesitation because that is what family does. Nina had cried on my shoulder and promised they would pay me back as soon as things turned around. They never did. Last year their car broke down and the repair bill was steep. I covered it because they needed reliable transportation for work and for my granddaughter's school. Derek had hugged me and called me a lifesaver. 6 months ago, Nina mentioned business troubles, something about a failed investment and a partner who disappeared. I wrote a check without asking too many questions because I trusted her judgment. Each time I told myself it was temporary help. Each time they promised repayment. Each time the subject quietly disappeared from conversation until the next crisis arrived. I had not kept a tally because you do not keep score with people you love. But someone had been keeping score and they had decided I owed them more than I had already given. I printed everything I could. The stack of papers grew higher on my table. Account histories, transaction logs, email confirmations from transfers I actually authorized versus the ones I never approved. The difference was stark when laid out side by side. Around 8 in the morning, I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts. There was a name I had not called in years but had never deleted. Robert Chen, an attorney I had helped a decade ago when he was fresh out of law school and needed volunteers for a community legal clinic fundraiser. I had organized the whole event from my kitchen, made calls, gathered donations, and turned it into something that gave him the credibility he needed to start his practice. He had told me back then that if I ever needed anything I should call him. So I called. He answered on the 3rd ring and I explained everything. The missing money, the officers, the realization that someone close had systematically drained my accounts. My voice stayed steady but barely. He said he would be there in an hour and told me not to talk to anyone about this until he arrived. He told me to document everything but not to confront anyone. He arrived 50 minutes later with his briefcase in hand, looking older but still carrying that same focused energy I remembered. He sat at my kitchen table as if he had always belonged there and read through every document I had compiled. He commented that I had kept everything organized and that it would make our case much stronger. He explained what we were looking at was not just theft but elder financial abuse, possibly fraud, maybe even forgery if they had changed passwords or authorization forms. Whoever did this was systematic. He made 2 calls, one to a banking fraud specialist he knew and another to a private investigator who handled financial crimes. He explained we would file an official report with the bank's fraud department and work with the police to build a criminal case, but he wanted his own team looking at this too because banks move slowly and we needed to freeze whatever assets we could before they disappeared completely. I asked if we could get the money back. He said we would fight for every penny and make sure whoever did this faced consequences. But I needed to prepare myself because family cases always get difficult. Robert spent the next hour going through the transaction history line by line. His finger stopped on a section near the middle of the page. He pointed out small withdrawals, 200 here, 300 there, all timed to specific days. I leaned closer and realized they fell on Tuesdays and Thursdays, the days I volunteered. At the community center when I was gone from 10 until 3, Robert's expression hardened. They knew my schedule. They waited until I was out of the house to make the transfers so I would not get any immediate alerts or notice unusual activity. The realization hit me like cold water. This was not impulsive. This was planned. Someone had watched my routines, learned my patterns, and used my predictability against me. Robert closed the laptop and looked at me with something that might have been anger on my behalf. He promised we would find out exactly who did this and how deep it went. I believed him. For the first time since seeing that empty account, I felt something other than shock and hurt. I felt resolve. Within 48 hours, things started moving faster than I expected. Robert called early Wednesday morning to tell me the bank had placed temporary holds on several accounts linked to the suspicious transfers and opened a formal fraud investigation. A woman named Patricia from the bank's fraud department called and spoke with me for nearly an hour, walking through every transaction and confirming what I had and had not authorized. Friday afternoon, Robert arrived at my house again, this time with a man who introduced himself as David, a digital forensic specialist. He was younger than I expected, with glasses and the kind of quiet intensity that came from staring at screens all day. He set up his laptop on my kitchen table and pulled up a series of files that looked like nothing but numbers and codes to me. David explained he had been reviewing the access logs from my bank account and what he found was concerning but also very useful for my case. He showed me device identifiers, explaining that every time someone logs into an account, the system records what device was used, the IP address, and the approximate location. My usual logins came from my phone and home computer, same IP address, same location, very consistent. But other logins came from a different device entirely, a laptop, and the IP address traced back to a location about 2 miles from my house. The timing matched those Tuesday and Thursday withdrawals. 2 miles from here. That was where Nina and Derek lived. David continued explaining that whoever accessed my account had also changed the alert settings so my transaction notifications were rerouted to a different phone number. That was why I never received warnings about the transfers. Robert asked if they could trace that number. David replied they already had. It was a prepaid cell phone purchased with cash at a convenience store 3 months ago, untraceable to a specific person, but the purchase location was near my daughter's neighborhood 3 months ago. They had been planning this for 3 months. The betrayal settled deeper and colder. This was not desperation or a moment of weakness. This was calculated and deliberate.